Studies show most women remember feeling fearless as children, yet by adulthood, a whopping 75% admit to feeling unworthy. Recognizing that self-esteem impacts everything from relationships and health to professional and financial success, Brenda Walton is on a mission to help transform their sense of self-worth and transform their lives. Brenda is an international best-selling author and creator of the W.O.R.T.H.Y Worthy program. In her books, Success University for Women in Business and Women Who Influence, she shares the powerful lessons she has learned from her own journey of transformation, and she discusses the unique process she developed to support women in recapturing their sense of being fearless, unstoppable, and wildly successful. We're going to have a lot of fun today, ladies and gentlemen. Brenda, are you ready to rock this?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You are now live on Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self. Welcome to the show, Brenda. Thank you so much for coming on today to share how to step into our worthiness and self-confidence with our audience. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me to join you today. I've been listening in, and especially just listening to Carolyn, and there's been some incredible wisdom shared today, so I'm honored to be here.
Yes. We got some amazing guests and special experts on here all throughout the day. I love this show, and it's my baby. And we are here and now. Speaking of here and now is usually called the present, and presents are also known as gifts. And Brenda, today's theme is what is the gift? And specifically what that means is, how do you relate when life throws you challenges, when life throws you curveballs, obstacles, difficulties, disaster? How do you relate to that as a gift? How do you show up and receive that and transmute that into wisdom, into growth, into learning, so that you can become your greatest possible self?
Actually, that was the biggest challenge that I had to overcome in my own journey to my own worthiness. Because when previous to really exploring that for myself, when those challenges or obstacles or hurdles bumped up against me, I would look at others and blame others and try to figure out what was wrong with them. I actually remember years ago in my own transformational journey, I hired this coach to help me figure out what was wrong with all the negative people in my life and all the negative events in my life. And it was through that process. She introduced me to the book, You Can Heal Your Life by W.O.R.T.H.Y. And I was listening to it on my iPad outside mowing the lawn. And there was a point in the book, and I don't even remember what it was, when I stopped immediately, dead in my tracks, and had a little cry, because I realized that it wasn't about them, but it was about me. It was, how am I showing up in my world, and how am I striving to be my best self? And so the gift in those challenges was the awareness that I have a choice about who I am and how I show up, and how I want to be in the world. And so had I not had those challenges, I probably never would have had that awareness.
Wow. It's so incredible. And, it really takes that trial and the tribulation to become aware, to get that wisdom, to be able to see things with new eyes, those wise eyes, those discerning eyes. So I love how you framed that you had to go through that experience to be able to see it. So Brenda, thank you for sharing that. And we're going to dive into this gift even more. And for right now, why don't you share with our audience a little bit more about what you do?
So I work with women. I'm a women's empowerment coach, and I'm the creator of the Worthy program. And so I am really focused on helping women become their best possible self. Yes. So taking them through similar steps that I went through on my own journey to reclaim my sense of worthy. Yeah. You mentioned in the intro that 75% of women admit to not feeling worthy. When I first heard that statistic, and I think it was on an Oprah show or something like that, it was on some show that I was listening to, and I was in absolute awe, because I thought I was the only woman who felt that way. Yeah. I never talked to friends about it. I never expressed my self-doubt. I just kept, moving forward and thinking I was doing okay. And yet I'd bump up against these events in my life that would, sidetrack me, and I'd, blame people, and it was always somebody else's fault. And in working through that journey and figuring out that I wasn't alone, it helped me to put together the Worthy program, and it put me in a better place of being able to serve the other women who were showing up in my life and going, what's going on, noticing some big changes in me and wanting to know what that was about and how I had sort of overcome some of the self-doubt and self-criticism that I was faced with. So I love seeing how women can really overcome some of those big hurdles that they've had in their life once they have this new awareness and understanding that it's about choice, and it's about taking back control and not living our lives from a place of other people's expectations. When some of these big challenges happened in my life, it took me a while to really come to terms with the fact that I had lost my childlike fearlessness. When I was a little girl, I have an uncle, and his favorite story to tell about me was I had stayed with them over the weekend. My parents were away at some event, and so I was staying with my aunt and my uncle. And in the morning, he went out to do chores, and I, of course, went to help him. And he had carried these 2 5-gallon pails of grain out to feed the bulls, and left one pail at the gate and then carried the other pail in to feed the animals. And because I couldn't see what he was doing and I wanted to see what he was doing, I climbed up onto the pail of grain and was kind of peeking through the rails in the fence to watch him. And he says, and when he's describing this story, it's at this point that he kind of takes on my little Brenda persona. And he said he turned around and he saw me like that, and then he put his hands on his hips and he looks me square in the eye and he goes, "And then you said, 'You're not the boss of me.'" And I had this sassiness, this carefree spirit when I was a little girl. But as I evolved, and I was reading some statistics recently about young girls and how I think the statistic was 7 out of 10 really don't admit to feeling worthy, that they don't measure up in some way in their community or their school or according to their parents or whomever. And so I went the same path. I had this little sassy spirit and carefree outlook on life. And then I kind of entered into school and started really caring a lot about what people thought and almost, I would say, conforming, trying to fit in and trying to make sure that people liked me. And so every time that happened, I lost a little bit of myself. And I see that in the women that I talk to now. They can link it back to some event in their life where they had this childlike wonder and then they lost it. And it was subtle and it was over time. Like it wasn't, in some cases it was one big event, but more often than not, it was these little steps along the way that just chipped away a little bit every time about who they were and how they wanted to show up and who they wanted to be, until we see them in adulthood and they're not really living a very authentic life at all. They have these challenges that are showing up in their life, and like me, wasn't really sure what was going on. And when I talk to them and when I see the transformation happen, it's magic to watch happens after that and how they start to really create a life of their dreams.
I love it. I love it. So you mentioned that it's over time that this happens. They have this chipping away, or these micro events that start to change from being childlike wonder and self-expressed and having that playfulness to being in a box and not having that self-worth, not appreciating and loving themselves. So does it take just as long to go back into the transformation into the power? Does it take a long time to do that? Or like how do the women especially, but our audience, how do we start reversing that, and how do we notice it? How do we know if it's happening to us, and then how do we reverse it?
So Brene Brown has this quote, and I forget which book it's in, but she says, once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. So once the women that I work with realize that they're in this pattern of self-doubt, lacking in self-worth, living their lives for other people, they have this increased awareness. So does it stop it from happening at all times in the future? No, but what happens is they're quicker to see when they're in that pattern again, and they're quicker to get themselves out of it. So every time they catch themselves in this sort of negative self-talk, that critical inner voice that we all have, when they catch themselves in that place of beating themselves up, criticizing themselves for, I didn't show up at that presentation the way that I wanted to. I didn't speak didn't say everything I had to say in that business meeting. I didn't stand up for myself in the relationship. Once they start to see those patterns evolving, they see it more frequently, and they're more attuned to getting themselves back on track. So I can honestly say that I'm not 100% free of that negative self-talk, but I always see it quicker now, and I can get myself back on track so much quicker. So it's more of a momentary thing now than, it would go on for months and months before. So I don't think it takes as long to recover it, because now you have this awareness and you're motivated to overcome this every time it comes up.
Yeah, I love it. So how do we supercharge our, tactical level? How do we, at the moment it happens, be effective at cutting it off? How do we be aware of it? How do we design our environment or our technology around us to help us out, to empower us so that we can be successful with this?
So one of the things that I like to really use when I work with women is the whole reframe. So it's normal and it's natural for these critical thoughts to show up. We've become so accustomed to it over our lifetime that it's almost instinctual when it happens. It's not like you're consciously choosing to do that. But when it shows up, I invite them to reframe that, and I invite them also to be like the one of the steps in the Worthy program is R, which is relate with love. So celebrating the fact that you actually became aware that you were in this negative pattern again, and like you did just a little while ago, patting yourself on the back and saying, this is great. I'm actually making progress. I used to think, oh crap, there's another thing now that I have to work with. And now I'm like, yay, there's another thing I get to work with. Because I know every time I uncover another limiting belief, another negative thought that's holding me back and keeping me from being my best self, every time I uncover that and every time I resolve it, it makes me a better version of myself. And I care about that for women, because we all have other people who are walking on our footsteps. And if I want to be the best version of myself, if I want to be an influencer in their lives, if I want to be that role model for them, then I have to be the best version of myself that I can be. And so I truly, I see the value every time it happens of uncovering and figuring out what the gift is in that, what the lesson is in that event that caused me to sidetrack even for a moment, finding the gift in that and figuring out what the trigger is and working to resolve that so it doesn't keep happening.
Wow, so powerful, so powerful. So I'm curious, can we take our audience through noticing some kind of pattern or tendency or thing that was unserving, being excited, kind of reframe that so that we can celebrate it, yay, and then kind of look for the root of it or how we can do something about that in the future so that we can really take them through that experience? Because right now you felt it and you know what it's like. I'm curious if we can take our audience through that in another minute or two exercise to really start to have them feel it and give themselves yourselves permission to do that while you're here with us. For everyone listening, you can do that with us, with Brenda and I. Right now, we give you permission to celebrate yourself, to celebrate finding this thing out that you may not have appreciated or liked before. It may have been, you felt like it was wrong or you shouldn't have it, blah, blah, blah. Now we're going to give you permission. So can we do that with them, Brenda?
Absolutely. One of the most powerful ones that I do, and even though the listeners probably don't all have a mirror in front of them, but they could do the same exercise and achieve the same result. And so the mirror exercise, and it's interesting, I have a friend who's done this over 2,000 times consecutively since she learned about this exercise.
Wow.
And it's really, if you took a moment now and just reflected on how your day has gone so far, all of the commitments that you made to yourself that you actually achieved, and celebrate those, but also demonstrate or exercise some forgivenesses for the things that you may not have been perfect at. So, for example, maybe it was, I really wanted to listen to all of Chris's Facebook Live show. So I showed up on time. I did the visualization exercise that he did with us this morning. I identified my goals. I identified my 3-month projects. And I'm so grateful and proud of you for showing up and doing those things and making a commitment to step up in a new and different way. But maybe there's some forgiveness that you need to give to yourself because the phone rang and I needed to step out for a moment and deal with the plumber who was following up on my phone call to him, or whatever it is that you maybe got sidetracked with or got pulled away from fully being present for the full 12 hours that you're on today. And so it's about celebrating what you have achieved today, right from the very beginning. Did you get up and meditate like you said you were going to? And if not, then have forgiveness for yourself and recommit to doing it the next day. So if everybody wanted to just take a few minutes and just jot down some of the things that you choose to celebrate about what you were really successful with today and that you have love and gratitude for that. And then also provide yourself with some forgiveness for being human and the things that maybe didn't, even up until now, haven't gone as perfectly as you had hoped they would today. But give yourself in that forgiveness some celebration for, because I think it's powerful to even just make sure that you made the effort, that you stepped up and you have the awareness now that you got taken off track and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, and what I also hear is acknowledging ourselves for having the dream or the goal or the objective in the first place. Like, you know, one of the things I wanted to do is launch a 14-day program before I go on to my silent meditation retreat. I'm doing a 10-day silent meditation retreat at the end of this month.
Cool.
And I wanted to do it, and I had all this plan put together, and it just didn't work out. You know, like the timing wasn't right, and excuses, right? Lots of excuses. But, you know, and I can have forgiveness for myself I put all this effort into it. I had the intention. I'm a freaking brilliant mind. I had all this put together, and no, I didn't execute it effectively. And what did I learn? You know, like, and Chris, like, great job for even having the idea, even having the audacity to take something on like that. And I asked for help from a lot of people, which is something that I don't usually do as well. So think about how in your process, everyone listening, how in your process, how did you get a little bit further this time than last time? How did you make a little bit more progress? Or how do you have just a little bit more awareness than you did before the last time you were dealing with this challenge? Or how are you even more equipped to handle this thing moving forward? How will you shift your actions, your perspective moving forward, and just give yourself that credit?
Because more often than not, we don't actually give ourselves credit for what we have achieved. And that is such a powerful thing. If you want to overcome this self-doubt, this lack of worthiness, start intentionally practicing and celebrating what you have achieved, because it gets it activates your inner coach. So you start to be more empowering. You start to to practice an internal dialogue that's more positive and encouraging, as opposed to, I call it picking up that proverbial stick and beating ourselves with it because we failed to do something. And like you said, you made the effort. It may not have gone perfectly, but let's celebrate the fact that you made the effort and that you're moving forward and you have this new awareness that, here's how I could do it differently next time.
That's right. Awesome. So I would love to dive even more into the WORTHY acronym and what that means, and anything else that you really want to share with our audience today. Like, I want to dive into you and what you're bringing to the table, and let our audience know who is Brenda and what is this WORTHY program all about.
Awesome. So do you want me to walk through each of the steps then?
Yes.
Okay. So WORTHY is an acronym, and I'll just share how the acronym and the program actually all came to be. So I was actually at an event with Jack Canfield, and I heard you mentioning him earlier today, but I was at an event with Jack Canfield, and we were doing a meditation. And in the meditation, or during the meditation, there was a book that was placed in my hands. And on the book was the title of the book, which was I'm Not Worthy. But someone had taken red lipstick and had crossed out the word not and written totally above it. So they had changed the title of the book from I am not worthy to I'm totally worthy.
That's awesome.
And and it scared me. Truthfully, it was bigger than I even ever imagined for my life. I never imagined anything connected to a book. I never imagined creating my own program. So it kind of scared me, and I had to work through that as well too. And that's sometimes what happens for people when they come up with this brilliant, great dream, is they have this, this self-doubt that checks in and goes, well, wait a minute, are you sure you really want to do that? That's kind of a pretty big dream. So I had to work through some of my stuff, even as I got this very clear message that not only was it a book, but it was a very clear title about overcoming our lack of a sense of worthy. So that's how the word came to me. And each of the steps are modeled after some of the work that I did on my own journey. So the W stands for wake up. And that module, or that step, is all about honestly facing what is and what isn't working in your life, and what do you want to do about it. So what needs to change, what needs to stop altogether, needs to be released because it's no longer serving and supporting you, and what's actually working pretty good but needs to maybe be enhanced a bit. And it's about all areas of your life. So maybe you have stuff that's up in your financial area that needs to be addressed, maybe business or your professional career, maybe relationships, maybe health and wellness, all areas of your life, and looking at it with courage and honesty to be really brutally honest about what is and isn't working. I think sometimes we get in a place of, I call it wearing a mask. We wear this mask that we want people to believe that we've got it all together, instead of taking the mask off and just being honest that stuff's up and I need to fix it and I need to do something about it. So that's the first step, is wake up. The second step is owning your power. And what happens here is all about recognizing that no longer playing small is an option. So it's looking at things that, what's keeping you stuck in situations that aren't working for you anymore? What are your limiting beliefs and how are they showing up? I believe that if we have limiting beliefs and they show up in one area, they're probably showing up in other areas. And we may not completely have that awareness just yet, but once you start to identify what limiting beliefs you have and start addressing them in one area, they start to resolve in other areas as well too.
Wow. So is there a fast track to being able to be aware of those limiting beliefs? Anything you'd recommend to have that perspective, to become aware, to take an inventory, anything like that? Well,
for me, it's about every time we bump up to something, every challenge we face, when we when we look at the areas of our life and figure out what is and isn't working, it's about when we're looking at the lesson in that, there's often a belief attached to it. I had a coach say to me once, he said, you know how you know whether you have limiting beliefs or not? And I said, no, how? And he said, well, if you're still breathing, you have a limiting belief of some fashion showing up. It just hasn't presented itself. And I went, oh, cool. So I've got lots of stuff to work on.
Yep.
So every time that you bump up against a challenge, every time that you face an obstacle, the more curious you can get about what's going on there, the more likely you're to identify a limiting belief, and the more likely you are to be able to resolve that. If you can't have the courage or the bravery to go deep and take a deep dive into what happened in that event, you're probably going to keep dealing with the same. It's going to keep showing up, and it's going to get louder and louder until you finally you have no choice but to deal with it.
Wow. Got it. So that's the O. What is the R?
R stands for relate with love, and relate with love has two aspects to it. The first and most important aspect is unconditional love of self. So a lot of times, because we've developed this self-doubt, this lack of worthiness, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not educated enough, we're not wealthy enough, whatever it is that shows up that says we're not enough. A big component of that is that we don't have this unconditional love for self. We're looking for validation from other people. And if we don't get it, it just reinforces this self-doubt that we have. And so a big step in relating with love is developing the ability of self-love and self-care, so that, and I talk about you can't give from an empty cup. You can't be that source of unconditional love for others if you don't have that unconditional love for yourself. And then the second aspect of relating with love is unconditional love of others. So being able to look at all people as perfect, whole, and complete just the way that they are, looking at them from a place of non-judgment, and also finding places of forgiveness for those people who maybe need forgiveness from us.
So that unconditional love of self and others, where do you find most people get stuck with that?
Unconditional love of self. I think it's really easy to be, especially for women, because we're nurturers. So it's easy to, extend love to everybody around us. But the hardest part is to be unconditional loving of self. So even the exercise that we had listeners do a little bit earlier, where they took the time to sort of celebrate what they had achieved today, really celebrating with an unconditional love for yourself that you had success today. That's the biggest hurdle, I think, in relating with love that people have.
Wow. Yeah, it's that celebration, the acknowledgement, the seeing ourselves. We're so quick to try to validate others and receive that validation from others. And when we learn to give it to ourselves, that's the fuel. That's the fuel to our greatness that will have us rise and transcend all the problems, is knowing that we are our own best friends, our own biggest champions, and we have our own backs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what's really really interesting to watch is when people realize, I think often when we're stuck in a place of really valuing our worth, being in a place of I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, whatever it is, I think there's also a piece where we're constantly seeking approval and validation from other people. And when we can give that to ourselves, regardless of whether we hear it ever from somebody else, it's so much more powerful.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, it's almost like you could have all the external validation you want, but until I believe it,
Exactly.
It doesn't do anything. And I've also heard on the flip side is lean on other people's belief in us until it becomes our self-belief. So we have mentors and teachers and leaders and coaches who see the greatness in us even when we don't see it. And it's through that process of facilitation and those people seeing it within us and illuminating, hey, like, you really are valuable, you really are worthy. Do you see it? You know, like, it doesn't do me any good just to tell you all day long. Do you see it? Do you buy into your worthiness and your self-value, self-concept?
Yeah, and you were mentioning, I think, when you were talking to Carolyn earlier about how you had you found such value in being a part of like Landmark or other groups like that, where you could be with like-minded people. That really was significant for me to see that, you know, people just loved and accepted me for who I was, and why couldn't I give that gift to myself as well?
Wow, that's powerful. I love it. Okay, next letter.
T. Next letter is T, which stands for trust, self, and source. And that's all about intuition. So having a practice or creating, tapping into our inner knowing, getting advice from like the visualization that you did this morning, but also going into a meditation and asking for advice or wisdom that will help us on our path. And also asking, not only receiving that wisdom from internally from ourselves, but also asking for and receiving external sources of support and wisdom.
Yep.
So being able, I think, and a lot of people I don't think really understand the ability to tap into that. And once you start to practice it more frequently, it's sort of magical to watch how quickly things show up. You know, the more you connect to it, the stronger that sort of muscle becomes.
Yes. Definitely. Yeah, the intuition, the listening beyond what is heard, or, you know, like looking in between the lines, and that energy, right? Tapping into the energy, the ether, the spirituality side it's like, come on, for people out there who aren't doing that yet, it's like, I want to say, get with the times. You know, like there's other forces beyond just the physical, and be curious about it. We're inviting you to step into that, to discover that, and ask for help. If you don't know anything about it, if you've been like closed off and closed-minded, you have no idea about this stuff, then ask for help and reach out to people and connect, and be willing to discuss it. Be willing to challenge your views. I know that's, for me, it's like that's been one thing that's helped me a lot. Is one, I'm very stubborn in a good way and hold strong to my views, and I'm also curious and open enough to learn, and like what else is there, what are the other pieces of the puzzle that not necessarily I'm missing, but that I might be looking past or looking over, or I haven't yet recognized or acknowledged, that would make a big difference for me. So be open to your perspective, and that comes with intuition, listening. You might have been getting signs all this time, you know, seeing your spirit animal, like a butterfly coming in front of you. I know I had a hummingbird outside of my window, like right in my tree outside of my window, and I'd see it like fluttering around, like right outside my window, like he's saying freaking hi to me. I'm like, oh, this is juicy. So it's like, what are the signs? Are you open to receiving the signs and the wisdom and the people asking for help, the phone call from that person who you were completely not expecting? Are you willing to dive into that and dive into the flow?
And what's interesting about that, and I totally agree with that, but what's interesting for me is that sort of the environment that I was raised in, there was this this thing I heard often, that bad things happen in threes. And once I realized that if that's true, if I think about and believe about and something bad happens, why isn't also the same if I think about and believe about good things happening? So paying attention to the signs, and the signs when they show up. And when you mentioned the hummingbird, it reminded me of someone that I was talking to who, was talking to me about a challenging relationship that she had, and she just, couldn't figure out what she needed to do about it. And then the conversation shifted, and she said that when she was driving into work that morning, that in front of her car dove like a dozen of these. I can't remember what kind of birds they were, but they were these, like a dozen of them flew right in front of her. And so I very calmly went through my animal speak book and found the bird that she was talking about. And it was about, the message was that there was someone in her life that was a challenging situation for her, and she needed to step up and really be clear in her communications to this person. And up until I read that to her out of this book, she just kept saying, "Oh, there's no signs for me. I don't know, I don't know what I'm going to do about this." And so, like you said, we often miss the signs. And so practicing and being able to connect to our intuition makes us more aware of the signs when they do show up.
Yeah. Be present. Be present. Get off the hamster wheel of life. Get off autopilot. Get off the subconscious programs that are running everything and probably keeping a lot of the same things that you might not like perpetuating. Get present. Get present. Breathe. Yep. Do some meditation. Go out to nature and just like sit there and enjoy it. Bask in it. That's one of the biggest things that I've found makes a difference for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's go on to H.
H stands, the acronym H stands for honor, self, and source. And so a lot of the work that happens here is about not only acknowledging and honoring the positive aspects of our past, but also bringing closure to some of those more challenging situations. Because if we are always holding on to the past, we can't fully move forward into our best self. And an example I have of this is a client that I worked with, and she actually had a lot of childhood trauma in her life. And I did a session with her. I use a technique called RIM. It's RIM. And it's originally was referenced in a book called Releasing Your Inner Magician. And it's all about taking someone into a deeply meditative state, and then in their own journey and in their own process, they're finding closure to those things in the past that they still have some emotional attachment to. And so this woman who had some significant childhood trauma, in a RIM session with me, she found herself in her childhood home in her actual bedroom. And she remembered at that point taking all of these traumatic events that had happened to her and locking them in a beautiful wooden box and hiding them away in her closet so that they couldn't hurt her anymore. And in this meditated state, she was able to find this box, and she opened it up and she took each one of these events out and was looking at them and reflecting on them. And two things sort of happened for her. The first was she didn't have the emotional reaction to them that she had in the past. So it didn't change that event happened, but she wasn't emotionally triggered by them. She wasn't, drawn to tears. They were just neutral to her. They were just these events that happened to her. And the other really interesting thing that happened was that she actually found compassion for the people who were a part of these events, because she recognized that in their own way, they were also hurt people. And so she found this place of compassion for those people that had some significant negative events in her life, but she wasn't triggered emotional, and she wasn't tied to that event anymore. And so she was able to move more fully into her best self because she wasn't being tied to them. She had honored her past, and she wasn't tied to it anymore.
Wow, that's so powerful. I know a lot of women, especially who go through traumas, they are like, how can I forgive not only the people, but myself? Right? Oftentimes they can't forgive themselves for letting it happen, for being so silly or stupid or dumb, or how could I have been so foolish, And I think that process of honoring the event, not necessarily making it okay, like it's not okay, but honoring the experience, and like we were talking about, the gift that gave them how do they transmute that experience into something that can serve other people, into wisdom, into passion, into, something else, channel that into energy, into creation in the world that makes a difference, that leaves this world better than when they first arrived.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. And then why?
Why is the final step, and why is yes to life. So once people have worked through waking up, owning their power, relating with love, trusting self and source, and honoring their past. Once they've done all of that work, they're really in a powerful place of saying yes to life. So they're stepping into some super successful habits like goal setting and taking action and asking for support and being open to receiving support. And they're doing things daily that move them forward. So I love the exercise that you did this morning where you chunked it down. So what's your goal in 1 year? What's your goal in what are the projects you're going to work on for the next 3 months? What are you going to achieve in the next month? What are you going to do in the next week and in the next day? So that's a lot of the kind of stuff that happens once people get to this yes to life step, because they're no longer stuck in this belief that they're not worthy. They've processed all of that, all of those previous steps, and really released a lot of the stuckness that was keeping them in situations that were far less than what they deserve. I believe, I say this often, I believe we're all born worthy, and circumstances or life has just taken us off track, and we've, temporarily forgotten that. And so reconnecting through all of the previous steps and getting to this yes to life stage, this is where the magic really starts to happen. There's so much amazing manifestation that begins to happen in this step. It's really cool to be a part of.
I love it. I love it. So we got this whole formula. I'm curious, where do you see this going in the next year, 5 years or so of being able to empower women and show up in the world? You've already written and been a part of 2 books, and you're already doing amazing stuff. We're curious, what does the future hold for Brenda?
So I have been working mostly one-on-one with clients, and I'm at a point where I'm ready to step more into more group sessions. So I'm looking at some group coaching and group mastermind sessions that I'm going to be setting up. And my big dream has always been, and so I'm in conversations with, my big dream has always been to hold a women's retreat where I would take women away and immerse them in these steps, working on one of the steps each day, and coming away at the end of 7 days where they're truly in that state of yes to life. I've dealt with what I need to deal with, and now I'm ready to rock and roll and make it happen.
Beautiful. Retreats. I love it. I love retreats because it's like such a sacred space. When you talk about events and seminars are an opportunity to get away from the usual world, and it's an opportunity to go into a new culture, a new paradigm, almost even like a new dimension. And then oftentimes they say when you go back to the real world, like the real training of what you learned at the seminar starts when you go back to the real world, because it's easy to be in the flow and in the spirit of the teaching while you're there. Now, what do you do when you go back to the real world? So that's awesome. I love what you're creating. And in terms of these women that you're working with, what can they expect when they work with you, when they start using and implementing this worthy method and program? How can they start seeing their lives shift? Like I know you mentioned a couple different stories and ways that people can benefit already, but I'm just curious if there's anything else you want to share with us about, what you've seen so far, what you aspire for women to be able to experience or achieve when they work with you.
I really want to have women at the end of a retreat or a year-long program, because I think even coming back from a retreat and real life happens, and that support needs to be ongoing. I think there can be powerful changes happen at a retreat, but I think the real challenge comes when you come back and you face your life again, and people who don't understand what you're doing or don't support you. And so I think the support is beyond that. And so I love seeing women who have the courage to just say, it's time that I make myself a priority. We have all these other priorities that are on our list, getting kids to school and soccer games and, volunteering at the PTA and the local library and, looking for and caring for my family and showing up at my business or my corporate career and doing everything that I said. And we have all these lists of priorities. But we're not even on that list. So we're so far down on the list that we're not even a consideration. And I would like to see at the end of working through their worthy stuff that they're on par with everything else that's on the list. That if they're not even equal to everything else that's on the list, then there's still work that needs to be done.
Wow. So, and it's through the daily actions of how do I prioritize myself, how do I feel, and then how do I adjust my schedule or take different actions. Depending on if I feel great, then I'll keep taking action on my usual tasks, growing the business, being there for others. But if I don't feel great, if I feel out of alignment, if there's work to be done, then ideally we're empowering these women to have the awareness to say, hey, it's time to focus on yourself. It's time to heal. It's time to nurture. It's time to really get yourself back into alignment. And we're going to give these women the power so that they can make that clear choice and have the distinction and the awareness to say, am I off track and are things working? Great. Keep moving. And no, something's off. Okay, let's dig in. Let's find out what's not quite aligned and get it back into alignment.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So is there any other things around self-confidence or empowerment that you wanted to give to our audience that would make a difference, you feel would make a difference? Any other exercises or stories or anything like that so that we can step into our power and our self-worth and our full potential?
I share a couple stories from my own personal journey in both of the books. In the first book that I was in, Success University for Women, I talk about how, in my personal, in my career, I was at a corporation and they were going through a merger and I didn't know what my future looked like. And at the same time, I found out that my partner of 2 years was cheating on me. And so how I work through that and what I did with that in the second chapter, in the second book, I talked about a point in my life when I was working again for another company and HR and my supervisor showed up one day and told me I was redundant, and all of a sudden I was without a job. And so I would say that being vulnerable, and when women are willing to share their imperfections and the things that, didn't go exactly the way that you wanted them to go. It wasn't a fun time for me when I was working for a company and finding out that I'm in the midst of a merge. The merger was referred to in the media as Care Bears meets G.I. Joe. And so it was not a fun time to be a part of that merger. And at the same time, finding out that someone had cheated on me. But by keeping that to myself, by not talking about it, by not working through it, I would have kept myself stuck. I would have found myself back in that similar type situation. And so I think the more honest and real that people can be with their imperfections, the things that aren't, exactly the way that they want to be, the more honest that they can be, the quicker they can take that mask off and stop pretending to be something that they're not, the quicker that you're going to get to where you want to be, the quicker you're going to get to becoming your best self, because you're facing it with honesty. It's easy to stay in a comfort zone. It's easy to keep wearing that mask. It's easy to settle for less than you deserve, because that's our comfort zone. That's what we've become accustomed to accepting for ourselves for years and years and years. And so the really courageous thing is to step out of that and say, hey, I'm not perfect. I wish that my life had been differently, but I'm stepping up and I'm claiming this space for myself, and I'm going to make changes starting today and moving forward.
Boom. Love it. Love it. Yes. Okay, so Brenda, we're beginning to wrap up here, and is there any other last minute things you wanted to share with our audience? And we would love to hear, how do we stay connected with you, and what do we want our audience to do next? What's the next steps that we want them to take?
So I would love, if anybody has any questions or wants to reach out to me on Facebook, I'm always available. They can either put comments in the comment box below and tag me by name, or they can send me a direct message. I'm always available to have those conversations with people. I also have a free Worthy Woman video series that if they wanted to learn more about the program or connect to me that way, the website is www.worthywomen.com, and they can get free access to those videos if they wanted to. When women are brave enough, and I know I talk about women, and my certainly the focus of my people that I work with tends to be women, but the truth is I also have men who show up and are looking for this sort of support as well too. So I focus a lot on women because that tends to be who shows up, but it doesn't mean that the men aren't also contacting me as well too. They're fewer than the women who contact me, but I also do have men showing up. So anybody who wanted to contact me on Facebook, or they could contact me at info. My other website is BrendaWaltonInspires.com. So they could contact me at info@BrendaWaltonInspires.com and reach out that way. If they have any questions or want to get more information from me, I'm happy to follow up with people that way as well too.
Awesome. Brenda, you're amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Everyone, if you want to take those next steps with Brenda, definitely do it. Get on it. Send her a message. BrendaWaltonInspires.com is her website. So is WorthyWomen.com. And oh my gosh, Brenda, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing about this, empowering us to step into our self-worth, our value, and being our greatest possible selves.
Thanks for inviting me to join you today. It was fun.
Yes. We love having fun. Awesome. We'll see you soon, okay?
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Take care.